Hello! This is Janie and Max from Sort of the Story, and we're here to tell you about some things that are happening between episodes 63 to 75.
During these episodes, there are interspersed audio break-ins of a person's voice along with the sound of static. You'll also notice in the show notes for these episodes, there is sort of a puzzle. This is part of a longer puzzle that we did leading up to episode 76, so this is all supposed to be there. Nothing to worry about, just a fun game.
Yeah, and we hope you have a lot of fun with it, and we hope you enjoy listening to these next couple of episodes. All right, enjoy this one. It's a good one, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we say some really stupid shit in this. You're going to love it. All right,
Bye!
and welcome
To Sort of the Story.
I'm Janie.
And I'm Max.
And we are the
Janie and
hosts of
Max.
Sort of the Story.
Hello.
And we know how to do our jobs. Yes, we do.
We've been doing this our whole lives.
Hello.
We are 1 year old.
Hello. 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 I'm Keith. And
Welcome. Sort of the Story.
and also you are here. At long last, you are finally also here. This podcast and the many episodes we've done, they've been a great way of spreading the old stories. Stories, as you know, are a way of remembering old things. And now that you're remembering, those old things, they're beginning to wake back up. Okay, Keith? Okay. I've got a story that I think you are really going to like today. Just make sure to keep listening. This story comes to us from a land in the center of all things, whose lands were once rich and fertile, but are now naught but sand. Though their names have been forgotten, the story is still whispered of even today, far east in distant lands. This story was preserved and translated by an anonymous source who was delighted to bring it to you today. In the land where the sun did not shine, under a sky devoid of stars, where the sun indeed had perished, amid a burning light. The first city sat upon a river, which flowed as mortal lives do, ceaselessly, loudly, and in patterns that seemed somehow both new and always familiar. Tan mud brick walls framed the settlement, protecting temple, palace, market, and port. Ocean blue gates adorned with strange beasts kept the strangers at bay. The pearl white temple lorded over all, even its nearby brother, the palace, which sat in more humble, sprawling splendor across many city blocks. Atop the tower there was a room that none but the priesthood might see. In it, the gods lived. Perhaps one, perhaps more, when they deigned it right. They waited there for proper sacrifice. In those days, the gods still desired worship, but they hungered yet for more. In that cold stone room atop the tower, there was a slab of rock and a knife. When murderers and criminals and enemy warriors were captured, they were brought to the altar, and the hunger of the gods was no more, at least for a time. The people of the first city dreaded times of peace, for it often meant that they must draw lots, lest the stone slab go empty for too long. Boats creaked into port, carts drifted in through the gates on clouds of dust, and everywhere men flowed through the city like so much necessary blood. An eternity of barley stretched out to the horizon on the opposite side of the river, a good harvest, blessed by the gods, and the thick rain that they often gifted to the earth. Sheep devoured the grasses to the south without rest. In the north, the forest lurked, gnarled branches hiding secrets that it would not tell. Everywhere, the storms that brought life left daily living in a gray and dismal haze. Through the fields, across dirt paths, and distant from any revelry, a grave was waiting, freshly dug. It ate at the ground of a nearby hut, in which, until recently, had lived a daughter and mother. Now, Only the daughter and memories remained. 5 and 12 years ago, a princess had been born within the gardens of the palace, and the king knew himself to be a happy man. The city had rejoiced with feasting, but on the 3rd day of the princess's life, the king had a traveling holy woman read her fortunes. He was ecstatic with joy about her life and full of curiosity about her fate. And besides, as a king, he had never known something he could not have, and even the veil of fate was simply another barricade he could have torn down with enough gold and manpower. It was a mistake he never made again, however. The holy woman prophesied to him that the princess would do naught but bring the ire and dark passions of the gods. She would be a heretic, a blasphemer, and destruction would follow in her wake. The king, pale with fear, had his daughter exiled within the night. The mother followed, though it's not known whether she was exiled as well for bearing such a sacrilegious daughter, or if she was simply following out of duty and love. But it had been a hard winter, and now the mother's love had ceased, as her body lay still within its grave. The daughter, the princess, restored the earth until only a small stone marked where her caregiver lay, and she poured cool water upon the dirt. She wanted her mother to drink, one last time, before her spirit went to the great cavern of the underworld, where the only meal was dry dust, and the lands were even darker than those gray fields of the surface. She traveled for 3 days and 3 nights before the city's blue gates rose up to meet her, wondering curiously at her return. She hungered, for she had foraged along her journey and eaten little. Secluded her childhood had been, and she was shy and wary of strangers at large. Traveling, she was truly fearful, as but one woman on the road would be, and the darkness of the night her only untrustworthy traveling companion. Past the gates she walked to the market, sandals upon the soft ground of the square. Beautiful smells assailed her, and her stomach began to feel as though it were eating its way back out of her. But she had no precious metals nor barley with which to bargain, so she went on her way, the eyes of the market watching the strange beggar girl warily. She was greeted by the king, her father, as a stain upon the palace's alabaster walls. "Accursed daughter, where is your mother, your steward, your guard?" he asked her, with not a greeting, for he recognized her immediately, seeing his own countenance reflected in hers. "She has gone to the gaping cavern under the earth," she announced, "and I have returned to my birthplace, as I have no place else to go. I have worked the soil all my life. I have kept humble, and I have made offerings to the gods. I was oft told that there was a dark prophecy about my life, and I have come here to prove that I am capable of no such thing." Her father stroked his beard, watching her from atop his clay throne. "That you have returned despite the holy woman's words shows you have no respect for prophecy and godly matters. It is arrogance, and I worry you will bring ruin to my lands. You would have done better to follow your mother into the dry lands." At this she hid her face, and she began to wish the same. "I am king, chosen by the gods themselves," he said, "and thus I must be especially pious to protect my people. However," he decreed, "you are my daughter, and if exile is not sufficient to keep you from your fate, there are other paths we may yet walk. There are those who bid me to make a sacrifice of you to the gods to appease them. Though it may be folly, I am your father, and I denounce this darker path. Let us consider our means, and you will stay here until we have." And so it was that she began to live again within the walls where she had been born, where at every window green leaves and vines reached out in greed for nourishment. Her needs were attended to by servants within the palace, though she was yet unable to leave the palace grounds for worry of what might occur. In this way, though she found herself now in the heart of all things, she was, in truth, once more in exile. She despaired at this, most nights, to be so close to her birthright and the family she had always wished to know, and yet to live as though she were ever farther away than before. Other nights she found herself grateful for her solitude, as she had spent so much of her life on her own, and she found herself shy and withdrawn even around those servants who she was free to order as she wished. Despite being locked away, she had been seen that day within the court, and the story of her return began to spread. Tales were told of her beauty, and many princes from neighboring lands took an interest in the lost princess, for she had gorgeous black hair that shone like a summer's night, and her skin was rich like the most luxuriously oiled timber. The moment her father decreed that she would stay, she smiled, and the various dignitaries who had been present had cursed they were not born to a higher rank. Those who frequented the market heard these tales and were shocked to learn who the beggar girl had been. For nearly a month after, no beggar had to want for food, for all throughout the city were charitable, hoping each new vagrant might be a lost prince or princess themselves. As such, it was not long before various princes appeared outside the princess's windows in the night. They wore long skirts of the finest sheepskin down to their ankles, and richly dyed woolen cloaks across their broad shoulders, and they begged her to grace them with a vision of the princess that could blind men with her beauty. She hid from them, however, for what did she know of men? She had never before received such admiration as this, and she knew not how to return their affections. She sent each away from her, citing her father's wishes that she remain locked away. "I am," said she, "despite fate's proclamations, humble, and wish only to obey my father's wishes." Each prince then begged her father for an audience with the princess and her hand in marriage, offering alliances, allegiance, and all the riches of their kingdoms. The king, in turn, turned each away. "You are fools," he said, "to wish for a life with one so doomed by fate. Young and misguided by beauty, there are more painful duties that those who are gifted power must attend to." In the end, each prince found himself yet again at the princess's window, entreating her to run away with them, to escape to their kingdoms where she would be free of her father, and from where she could lay a claim to the kingdom of the first city, and perhaps one day control it. Said she, "You promised me freedom, but I would be a stranger in these lands. It seems then I would only be trading one man who controls me for another. Am I a thing to be owned for my beauty or my birthright? This is a misguided affection, for we know each other not. Let us keep it as such." At this they would withdraw into the night, fine cloaks clutched tightly to their chests, and she would once more be left alone below the black sky. Her father, the king, before long, crafted a solution that he hoped would appease the gods and prevent their wrath. He would have her bound to the city temple as a servant of the gods, and in doing so alleviate their anger with her praise. Speaking such, he said, "I do fear to send you to such a holy place, where the gods live and demand our sacrifice. But the gods are everywhere, and there is nowhere I could send you that could prevent the curse that is upon you. In doing this, I hope to prevent what we may." And so, the day next, she was sent to the temple. It was a great square ziggurat, like massive steps that reached up into the sky. It stood above the city, as one elevates a king or a watchman. It looked as though it was the way in which the gods ascended to a world above this one. She was greeted quickly by a priest at the steps of the temple, without fanfare. Sandals on heavy baked brick steps, she walked up them for what felt like an eternity. Higher above the city than she'd ever been before, the princess could see the whole of the bustling city, but it seemed removed from where they stood. She wondered if the gods at times didn't feel isolated, exiled, as she often did. Once inside a side chamber, her wrapped shawl from the palace was taken from her, and she was given a new one with less colorful fringes. It was plain and unadorned, as they were meant to be before the gods. She could read and write, her mother had made sure of that, and the priest who examined her skills in this found her to be quite satisfactory. After reciting thoroughly from countless tablets, the priest brought her to the sleeping quarters she would be sharing with the other acolytes. A building adjacent to the temple, full of reed mattresses but vacant of their owners, as the acolytes' duties were not yet complete for the day. After briefly becoming acquainted with the space, she was taken to witness said duties around the temple grounds. The weaving of wool to cloth, the dyeing of the fabrics, the seamstresses, the scribes, the kitchens, and those who handled the animals, the musicians and their hymns, the guards, the messengers, those who accounted for the temple's resources, and those who cleaned the grounds. At times she saw the priests and priestesses throughout these rounds, healing the sick outside the temple, and praying and purifying within the grounds. Over the next few weeks, she was given every job within the temple to make sure each task felt familiar to her. She washed, she weaved, she wrote, she sang, and always she tried to show that she meant the gods no disrespect, even when she scrubbed the blood from the robes of the altarmen and hurried past the cages of men from the east locked deep within the temple. And truly, she did not. Death was an inherent part of creation in the first city. It was essential nourishment for the gods, the fuel that kept the world alive. Man was told he had been created to toil and to appease the gods. We were meant to feed them through our labor, our prayers, and when the time was right, with our bodies themselves. Things died, and in dying they rotted. They fed the soil. In his sacrifice, man fed a greater soil still. However, at times the gods deigned to consume a lesser meal. There were always sheep and pig by the temple, and the princess could often smell them at night, could hear their bleating, much like the empty prayers of the evil men in the temple's cages. Other acolytes, the ones who had been to the great sacrificial chamber, sometimes whispered that they had seen the gods. At times, behind the curtains that masked the sacrifice, they saw them, gnarled, scaled appendages that seemed to float on the air itself. Others saw nothing but flickering shadow that curved and warped in hideous patterns as they hungered toward their meat. The princess befriended those acolytes that she could. For though devoted to a higher cause, they were still yet young. Some of the men seemed to want to simply bed her, and she rebuked them and ignored their unending prattle. One evening, the princess attended to her prayer duties within one of the many dim chambers of the temple. Among firelight, she sat beside another acolyte and began to chant, in a quiet whisper, her awe and praise of the gods. She briefly took in the acolyte to her side. She noticed the strength in his arms, but scolded herself for straying from her praise. As though sensing this sacrilege himself, the acolyte beside her slowed and turned to her with a cold fury and a deep hatred in his eyes. The curse of her birth followed her, even here, she supposed, and she could sense his disdain for the fact of her existence.
So, wait, I'm sorry. What was his problem with her?
Oh, he hates her.
Okay, but why?
Oh, he just fucking hates her.
A few of the acolytes, she suspected, thought she deserved not the robes of the priesthood, but instead the slab, and a cold blade against her throat. The moment he had completed his prayers, the acolyte exited the chambers. She fell into black thoughts, and lay prostrate in prayer long into the night, wondering at what darkness still awaited her. She sought him out to make it right, to prove to him her devotion, but the other acolyte hid from her and avoided her presence within the temple for many days. She discovered he was one of the orphans taken in by the temple off the city streets. The temple had some, though not many, that kept their own company within the holy grounds. She wondered if her existence wasn't to him some insult to the temple that had brought into his life salvation and a kind of ease. She redoubled her prayers. She was lauded for it by the priests and the elders. She was pleased to find that one day even the orphaned acolyte praised her dedication. The princess carried on with her prayers deep into the night, desperate not to bring shame upon herself or her father's kingdom. It was one such late night that she encountered a stranger within the deep halls of the temple. He reeked of sweat and waste and fear. She smelled him before she realized what she saw. A dark silhouette hunched against the wall too near to her. One of the doomed men, she realized too late, from the cage. He leapt upon her, and she felt a pain wash through her mind as her head struck stone. But then, nothing more. Unaware of herself for a brief moment, she roused herself quickly and rose to find the man bound by hand and foot, as well as silenced by a cloth gag. A bruise had already begun to swell across his face, and the blood promised to the gods dripped from his nose. But yet he still drew breath. The orphaned acolyte stood above them both, tightening knots on the doomed man's limbs, and he praised her for alerting him to the danger. She did not remember this, but aching from injury, she bade him good evening and retired to her quarters to rest. She was visited that night by the high priest and was overcome by the honor. The high priest examined her for injury and proclaimed much thanks for her assistance that night. Other eyes from other beds stared jealously, but the princess hid the bit of pride that swelled within her chest. Some of the other acolytes whispered in the night rumors and fears. They worried that the high priest was not a man, but instead a god, sent to test their devotion. In hushed tones, some others still noted the cruel discipline of the priests, and wondered if they were instead not demons, sent to steal their meat and the worship of the gods. One boy, country-born, insinuated that perhaps animals did not escape in the night. Perhaps they were taken by creatures so hideous that their visage boiled the fish in the river, by creatures of creeping shadow and poisonous air. At the river, disturbed by these ideas, the princess did not notice one day as other acolytes left from their washing duties, and as the day grew short, she soon slept upon the grasses by the river bank. She awoke panicked in the dark, though she knew not why at first. It was not until the second sounding of the horn that she realized raiders from the east had come to the first city, seeking retribution for their captured kin. She crept along the river, but torchlight soon found her, and the men were upon her with their spears. They took notice of her shawl, which was the plain dress of the temple, and they grinned a sick-toothed smile, weapons raised and lurching after revenge. As they moved upon her, she noticed the smell of cooked meat. She looked upon the river, and she noticed with horror that the fish in the water had begun to boil. A beating of heavy wings fell upon the air, and a scream like none the princess had ever heard began to scrape against her ears. Darkness itself seemed to writhe and twist around her, and the air felt sick and hostile within her chest. Where there had once been men around her, now there was only a twisted lump of flesh, a ring of guts and meat, and the smell of death upon the air. Before her thrummed a nightmare in the darkness, black eyes piercing her with their malevolence. "Are you a god?" the princess asked. "Or a demon?" "I want more than anything," the thing cackled, "to turn you into a sacrifice, to feast on your flesh to the bone, and then to suck the marrow."
And so she's like, first of all, that's hot. And then second of all, what? Why? What the fuck just happened?
"You have witnessed death, and those who have seen the face of death are all the more desirable to those of my ilk." At this the princess thought of her mother, a grave dug too shallow for a life lived too short. "If you are a demon," she cried, "then feed you must, for you will not have my worship. You are a hideous boil upon the merciful creation of the gods." But at this the thing only laughed, and a cold wind seemed to blow from every edge of the horizon. She turned to flee, and found the demon within every corner of the darkness that she sought refuge in. She closed her eyes tight, and found the demon even there, still staring back from within the black. "You asked if I were a god or a demon. You are right to both, and wrong to each. They are but one and the same, and each hungers for the flesh of the living in turn. However, those of us who are greater than our most craven urges transcend such base desires." At this, she once more opened her eyes, and found before her the orphan acolyte. "I eat naught but the flesh of the beast, and it is a far finer meal than the dry dust in the land of the dead, the dark and dreary cavern where I spent so many a year, and from which fools say there is no return. I walk in the skin of a man to remember my frailty, the thrill of mortality. I remember the pain of death, and I wish it on none, though some, such as these men tonight, find it in fair justice, and all do encounter it in time." He brought her with him then, leaving the violence of the night behind them, and through tunnels and doors placed cleverly within the temple, which the princess had never noticed, he brought her to a chamber deep within the earth where other figures sat seated, and the acolyte spoke. "We are all demons, a heretical sect. We hide from man and gods alike, under the clouded sky deep within the earth, within the temple, within their very place of worship. Once men, we crawled our way back in escape of the underworld. There are secret cracks within that great cavern that houses the dead that one might use to return. And we have returned in hunger to feed once more. Your gods demand the finest meat of all, one that satiates the fleshless spirit and the ghosts who were once men. We scavenge and take what scraps we may." At this they beckoned her to a stone altar within that dark place, and led a pig upon the slab, demanding her fealty and her worship in return for her safety that night. She performed her first sacrifice in that temple under the temple, and the demons drank greedily of the blood of the beast, tearing into the meat and the bone. They shared with her all their secrets, that any spirit, god, or demon may be trapped within a clay likeness of itself, as the spirit was without and desired a body. They begged for her devotion, and offered her knowledge in return. Should a spirit be trapped within clay and then shattered, it would be dead once more, and return to the dry fields of dust. This, the heretic demons lamented, is why they hid from God and man alike. The orphaned acolyte, the demon god, admired the princess's beauty, and he revealed that he desired to wed her, a want which he had not known since he was a man, a desire that he did not indulge in before his demise, a death that came when he was but her same age. He confessed that he had felt this way for some time now. He had often marveled at her beauty in the night as she slept, and upon their first meeting he had been overcome by a desire to either devour her or wed her, and he much preferred the latter. "But how am I to marry a man I know not the name of?" she asked. And he spoke his true name, which I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, but I believe it was... "But how am I to marry a man I know not the true form of?" she asked. And he revealed his true self, which burned her with a brilliant light and a glorious radiance, glimmering and glittering with divine power. "But how am I to marry a man who knows not what I want?" she asked. And he showed her how a spirit might climb inside a mortal's heart and see what desires lurked there. He showed her how one might answer these prayers in kind. However, he saw no prayers within her, and asked, "How am I to marry a woman whose truest desires I know not? What would make one such as you my wife?" She bade him to wait, and she would reveal what would please her in time. He only need promise to fulfill her wish, whatever that might be. She found him to be strong and attractive to her sensibilities, and he had protected her twice now. They agreed and celebrated throughout the dead of night, as the demons wrestled in the forest to show their feats of strength and power.
Just wrestling with the boy.
The earth itself shook and thunder clapped as they lifted each other by the girdle and tossed their opponents to the far horizon. He flitted through the forest in monstrous forms, carrying her upon his back, and he bade her to cling tightly to him, as a young monkey clings to its mother. But the sky was clear, and the rumbling of the earth drew other gods, starved for the rich human sacrifice that they smelled amid the heretics. As the night drew on, and the princess lived yet unkilled among the demons, the gods began to disperse, seeking other meals. Except one, who waited, patient and hungry. The heretics warned the princess of these other reborn gods, who wished man naught but ill will in their eternal hunger, and who the demons considered their superior in strength, and were dangerous as such. The last god who had not left, the hungry god, stole back down to the underworld through secret passages and openings known only to one such as he. He took with him naught but a clay jar, and once he was upon those dry fields, he sealed but a single soul within it. Once more upon the earth, he loosed the lid of the jar just so, and as the princess slept within her bunkhouse, she heard the voice of her dead mother call out to her, desperate for her help. Roused from sleep, the princess chased the voice, which was evermore just out of her reach in the darkness, until at last she had left the temple, passed the gates, and found herself deep within the woods, where she saw a small clay pot. And next to it stood the dry and empty skin of a man, a husk, with 1,000 serpents the size of mighty branches erupting from his back.
He's jacked. He's immortal. He brought her a present. He let her hear the voice of her dead mother yet again. He found hot. Jamie, no. This is the true love interest of Jamie, the story. No.
As the princess leapt to the jar, hoping to free her mother, the serpents struck as one, mouths ripping her skin and muscle, her spirit from her flesh. As she lost herself within that thing that consumed her, she felt a power within it, a will and a strength such as she had never known, one that could carve rivers and rend mountains, the force of a god. And the next instant she felt the force flow out of it like water from a dam, as the heretical demons set themselves upon it. The heads of snakes fell upon the ground, soul by soul and meal by meal, until only the first spirit of the thing remained, pitiful and shrieking. The demons consumed that as well. A great crime among gods and demons, to kill one of their own. The demon acolyte then found the pieces of the princess, meat and bone, mind and soul, and consumed each part of her himself. After a moment of hesitation and hunger, he began to retch and spat her back up, regurgitating her back into the world, once more whole and sound of body and mind.
Aw, like a baby bird. Yeah, like a baby bird. Baby bird.
She took many weeks to recover from this. Among the demons was the high priest himself, who acted as a leader within their infighting and politics. Well versed as he was within both the arts of the holy and the physical, he treated her wounds and her fears, and gave her his blessing in her union with the demon acolyte. The high priest revealed it was he who had taught the others how to escape from that dark place beyond life. He shared it with those he thought worthy and those he pitied, orphans and beggars, the sick and the meek. Many learned the black roads that led them back to the surface, but few succeeded in their journey. The acolyte had despaired much since his return, and the high priest hoped that this good fortune would yet turn his melancholy to a kind of joy. As the months continued, the spring harvest of the barley came upon them, and as such the celebration of the reaping as well. The priesthood spent many days praising the gods for their mercy and beneficence. They purified themselves in the river, and told the stories of man's creation by the gods, teaching that man was made to toil and serve. "Fools," whispered the demon acolyte. "All men are deceived. Men made the gods, and man's toil is naught but slavery." The princess wondered if she had not been a fool herself, for all her devotion to false gods of greed and gluttony. The curse that had weighed on her from birth seemed now only to be a curious promise of things to come. The king himself appeared within the temple on the 5th day, to show humility before the gods. He gave her only the smallest token of his affection, a brief nod before his prayers. She thought of all the suffering of her life, and all the parts he had played within that. She knew him to be a fool, praying to foolish gods, and felt the strong desire to strike him across the face to teach him true humility. There was a feast at the river that night. The air was warm in the dim light of the evening, though a chill breeze found its way in through the west. She turned to the demon acolyte then, in the half-light of the night, and told him her one secret desire, her wish that he had promised to fulfill. "Teach me the secret roads of the underworld," said she, "that I might re-emerge as a god upon the earth. To feel the power I felt when I thought myself assured to die. To be your bride, truly and forever, an eater of souls and beasts, a demon among the living, a match for even the lying gods themselves." The acolyte was against this. The roads of the underworld were ever shifting, and he had seen the demons that lurked there too, feeding in their desperation on the empty fat of souls themselves. He feared that she may well never re-emerge. As well, he had died young, a beggar from the streets, and he wished for her life and unlife to be a thing of pleasure, unlike his. He felt affection for her that was strange to him, as a dead man. He shared with her his love, and embraced her there, by the bank of the river. "The panther has caught his gazelle," she jested, from within his embrace. "On this night," said he, "it is the gazelle who has caught the panther." But she was persistent, and he had indeed spoken an oath to fulfill her utmost desire. He begged her only to wait. Beyond them, lurking in shadows and dust, other gods waited as well, silent and hungry for both flesh and revenge. In the land where the sun did not shine, under a sky devoid of stars, where the sun indeed had perished amid a burning light. The spring was full of joy, though the season passed quickly, and time fled from them as a hound who plays and does not notice how far he has wandered from his master. It was one such night when the princess set herself upon her duties to the heretical sect. With a sheep upon the altar in the catacombs of the temple, she set about her sacrifice with blade in hand and beast upon the stone, but the long joy she had felt made her careless, and the animal, fearful in the dark and sensing danger in her approach, bit hard upon outstretched hand and spilled her blood upon the floor. At this she heard a terrible keening, and one of the demons, driven mad by his hunger, was upon her. Fangs in a throat deep like an abyss were upon her one instant, and the next she heard a terrible cracking of stone, and a strange bit of light in that deep dark place. The demon acolyte had driven his kin through the temple walls themselves, and thrown his brother to the sky, and then yet further still. Cold fury radiated across his face, and his eyes glowed with the pale fire of a demon's. He spun with wild fury upon his fellows, and each one in turn was shot upon the horizon before their lust for flesh could overtake them, even the high priest himself. The temple began to sway, and the stone began to creak as clouds of choking dust filled the air. The princess wondered if, in that dark and the dust, she hadn't already died and entered the great abyss of the dead, when she suddenly felt the rush of cool air and the thrumming of insects, and found herself deep within the wood. Elsewhere she heard a clap like a thunderbolt echo across the land, and a sound like a landslide that followed it, and she knew the temple was no more. A figure dark in form and mood stood before her, and she knew it to be the acolyte, her betrothed, even before he spoke thus. "You have failed to properly bear us a sacrifice. You have brought the hunger of the demons upon yourself, and caused a great calamity within the first city. You knew the dangers that lurked here, but you let yourself grow careless. You cannot be trusted. I had promised you power were we to be wed, but we will be wed no more." At this he vanished as smoke upon air, and she was left within the dark of the wood. Bereft, alone, she laid within that glade until hunger and cold overtook her, and she began the long journey back to the city gates. Clouds of dust rose from the city center, and no temple graced its sky. She wondered then at her curse, and whether this was all it spoke of, or whether there was worse yet to come for her fate. As the city rose to a dark morning, the princess felt a foul mood to match. The priesthood with no head priest was disoriented and bereft. Those demons who had been exiled by the acolyte were presumed to be missing, or dead. Rubble was cleared, none were found, all were mourned. Greater mourn still was the temple. With no appeasement to the gods, men worried that the fall planting would be blighted, that the river would soon flood the city, that the gods in their hunger would begin to come for their children in the night. All looked for one to blame, and though they spoke it not, the princess felt the hateful glares of some upon her back, as many knew the prophecy of her birth. None knew, as she did, that she deserved their ire and their hate. She wandered dangerous streets on those nights, stretches of derelict buildings in which the worst men plied evil trades, and where she knew her life was but a stone's toss from its end. In these dark and gloomy places, she sometimes felt as though she could sense the presence of the dead, the many lost souls who once walked these streets. She felt her own death oppressive in the cold air and watching her always from nearby windows. She knew it madness, but in this swirl of death, she felt once more as one with the demons, and considered this a strange new form of worship and devotion. A new altar was built upon the ground, and unadorned as it was before the temple. But the prideful gods looked with disdain upon it, and their sacrifices went uneaten. They had been abandoned, the first city cried, and they set about with wild panic to rebuild the temple. Mud was shaped, dried, and set with a fervor and dedication that the city had rarely known in its languid comforts. The princess found some comfort in the work, and in the other acolytes who worked alongside her. One, a country-born boy, the same one who had first whispered to her in the night, wondering if the priests weren't in fact something else, something demonic, was her closest confidant in her sadness, though she told him only pieces of the whole truth.
So this guy is gorgeous. Okay. He is just impossibly hot. He's got the, tall, brooding, etc.
Yeah, yes.
Stormy eyebrows,
yes.
and long eyelashes, and just, the whole 9 yards. The whole 9 yards that we use to measure hotness. The 9 yards of hotness.
Picturing, a Jason Momoa,
Yes.
early Jason Momoa.
Yeah,
just Game of Thrones edition.
Beautiful smile.
Yeah.
Inner turmoil.
And then came a darker day still for the princess. The high priest, though distant from the first city, cared for it despite all this, for he had been the one to give second life to the beggars and the orphans of the street. He felt the anger of the gods, and the swirling hunger that threatened to soon consume the people of the city, and he knew what must be done. With power to move the flesh of men like clay between his hands, even from far-off lands, he saw fit to shape men of the temple into fierce protectors of mankind, gifting them the claws and fangs, the scales and talons of demons, making them anew into grotesque and mighty beasts. They carried the gifts of demons and all things deadly in nature, and yet they were free from the hunger of these beings. The country boy was one of them. The princess knew not where he had gone for several days, and she feared that she had driven him away, as she had the other acolytes with her sullen moods. She wandered in these moods as she had done before, in dangerous places. This night, however, she felt her feet drawn to a clearing in which she and the acolyte had spent many a spring night together. The moment she sat upon the grass, she felt as if the clearing itself was a gaping mouth, ready to consume her. Dread filled her, as the night seemed to grow darker, and thick, boneless limbs like the creatures of the sea sprang from every direction, coated in sharp barbs that snapped branch from tree like boats cut through water. A dark god was upon her, hungry after weeks without sacrifice. Once more she felt death turn its gaze toward her, and she wondered quickly if she would see her mother. If she could find those passages in the deep on her own. If she would see the acolyte, perhaps, one day after that. But this was not the day for that. For with a snarl and a shriek, beast-men leapt from the wood, and with ripping beak and tearing fang, they shred god-meat from its limbs. Its cry left the princess in pain, but it found it could not reshape the beast-men as it wished, for they were no longer men. They were like it now, and the god's last thoughts were ones of fear. Later, the princess would be glad to think of that. With twitching scales and bristling fur, the beastmen turned to her next, and knowing not what they were, the princess fled into the river. Knowing gods and beasts pursued her, and having no protector, she swam deep into the river, until the water filled her lungs, making what choice she had the power to make. But she awoke on the river bank, sick with the filth of the river, and spat back up what she could. She saw there before her a beast unlike any she had seen. It seemed to shift as she turned her head, as claws turned to talons, turned to stingers, or were, perhaps, all the same at once. It spoke to her in a voice that was harsh and unfamiliar. It was the country boy, though. There was no doubt as to that. "I curse the gods and demons," he spat, "that have made me such a creature. And yet there is power in this form such as I have never known. Would you not love a creature such as I, that could save you even from the hunger of the gods themselves?" She could not, though, for despite all that had occurred, her heart still belonged to another. In response, the beast growled, crying out, "I have been made a beast, and I shall live as a beast, unloved by mortal women who are repulsed by this accursed form. I will never take wife such as I am. I will know only violence and the hunt. The gods are cruel beyond measure for this curse. Each deserves death, and I will be the one to sink my teeth into their neck and bring it to them."
Like, in a hot way. Yeah, like in a cool, sexy, cool, normal guy way. Yeah, no, seems normal and sexy. That's two things.
Far to the east, where the demon acolyte had fled, he spent his days in misery. For he had fled, in truth, to protect his betrothed from the monstrous hunger of his ilk, the demons he so despised. He thought of nothing but this tragedy, which dampened the flame of his joy until there was none left. When he felt the princess at death's door as the river began to swallow her, for he was attuned to such things, he felt assured she must be dead. He began to seek out, in those lands to the east, other, more powerful demon gods. He sought out the kings of their people, for strange as they were, even gods have kings. He hoped for a second death, that he might find his lover's soul within the darkness of the underworld once again. The brilliance of the god kings burned even he. Worse yet was the sting of their refusal. He was long dead, and did not have the taste of man-flesh upon him, for he ate naught but beast. To kill him was, to god kings, a pointless endeavor. He fled from their dark mountains then, and fled instead to other cities of men, wherein he sought to teach clay workers the secrets of his people, that their spirits sought a body, and should they craft his likeness, he would be trapped forever, and should they shatter it, he would die once more. He sought to teach them this art, that once he was gone they might continue their black work, until all gods were but clay upon the ground. The high priest, sensing this desire, fled at once to the first city, and there he found the princess yet still living. As a flock of crows he carried her east, and by revealing her, saved the demon acolyte from his bleak work. However, the god kings had pursued him, seeking to prevent him as well. The princess saw them then, like living bolts of lightning upon the sky, who gazed at her with the empty dark eyes of a skull, and whose hatred boomed like thunder. Infinite serpents they were, with wings that bloomed like death, and who glowed with frightful power. They demanded her upon the altar of sacrifice then, for she knew the secret of the clay, and she had glimpsed their true forms. Even the kings of gods feared death, having known its terror once, and even their escape could not be guaranteed a second time. But the demon acolyte showed them the desires of the princess's heart, to become as one of them, and to witness the underworld, and then escape it. With this their fear was abated, and she was allowed to journey with the two demons back to the first city, to the land she knew, in the center of all creation. There they met with their demon kin again, and all bowed before the princess, begging her forgiveness. The demon acolyte revealed that he had exiled them and fled himself, for he had feared her life might too soon be at an end, should their hunger overwhelm them. For life was as fragile as clay, and as easily shattered. But he had found they must be as one. He could not leave her once more, even if he must see her to the lands of the dead. But no sooner had they finished reuniting than they smelled the musk of animals around them, and saw the cruel eyes of the beast men in the night. "We have heard your words," they said, "lowly demons, and we warn you thus. That one is our Lord's rightful mate, and we will not abide this unlawful demonic union." She saw then the beast who had once been the country boy in the center of all the beast men, and upon his head was a crown of bones, for he was the beast lord. They made to set upon the demons as a pack of wolves, but she cried out for mercy, and the beast lord halted. Said he, "We are at peace for now, demons, for gods hunt throughout the night, and we have greater prey to kill. But should you remake her as one of yourself, we will send you back to the dark place you crawled out of, for we have tasted the flesh of gods, and we know our strength." The demons did fear then, for although the high priest had shaped the beasts, they were as the gods and demons now, and he could no more reshape them than he could mold dry clay. The beast men departed then, and the princess despaired, for she knew the god kings would surely consume her were she not a demon by year's end, and this treaty must one day be broken. And when it was, she did not know if beast or demon would prevail.
So this is story type ATU 363 in the Ernst Thompson Uther Index. The Corpse Eater.
In the land where the sun did not shine, under a sky devoid of stars, where the sun indeed had perished, amid a burning light. As the summer ended, the city found its temple rebuilt and renewed, though the gods remained absent, and stories were told of monstrous beasts lurking outside the walls. In the night, men and women were killed. Scraps of flesh and blood were all that were left behind, and none knew why. In the midst of this, the princess prepared to become a priestess. She had finished her training, and despite the absence of gods, and the sacrificed men who simply rotted on the slabs, tradition and decorum of that empty temple dictated that she should take up the robes of the order. She thought it rather amusing, and wished that she could show the holy woman who was present at her birth what had become of her, a priestess in the highest temple. But that was not the whole truth, was it? At night she studied with the heretical sect, and learned from the high priest all the secret ways within the realms of the dead, though they shifted always, and he instructed her in all the dangers that lay therein. She visited sometimes with the Lord of Beasts out in the forest, for she wished to keep their peace, and he had been a friend to her once. He often demanded that she become his bride. She rebuked him, and returned once more to her home within the city, and the demon acolyte who was himself soon to become a demon priest. Both were to be wed before the summer's end, and this joy consumed much of their days. She hoped to consummate the marriage before her death, to know the last pleasure of the flesh before being thrown into the underworld. He worried only about her eagerness to die, that she might depart for that cavern under the earth too early before she could safely return to him, and that he might, in his lust or hunger, be the one responsible. It was one such night, when the demon acolyte was awake and lost in thought, that he heard a clamor throughout the city, a shrieking of men and women, and the harsh hiss of shadows that crawled across walls and slithered in through windows, seeking to take the living as a meal. For there was a screaming mass of the dead who had been loosed upon the first city, taken from the world of hunger and dust and brought to a field rich in ripened meat. Some were more substantial, having fed upon the living in the night all these past weeks, the killers the city had sought. Still, the demon acolyte leapt from the earth upon hairy wings, and his claws reminded those shadows that even the dead can die. Above, in the sky, dark clouds rolled in, and a vast snake rolled across them, talons outstretched, with udders which spewed poison across the land. It was as if a glistening, scaled river had appeared in the sky, and this god swept upon the city on a tide of fear. "Where are those who have broken our law," it roared, "and killed a god? Where are the heretics and the beasts who stain our sacred ground? Where is the princess, the meal gone uneaten? I will have them all, and more, for I hunger for both man-flesh and revenge." The heretical demons devoured many of the dead, weak as the newly reborn were, and as a swarm of mighty locusts, they carried the princess atop the temple, where she might be safe. Beastmen feasted upon the dead and howled at the great monstrosity in the sky, seeking another taste of god blood. But the beast lord alone, in his crown of bones, came to the princess atop the temple. "I go to my death," he growled. "And should I die, I hope to find you after, princess." He kissed her then, and she shrank back, both from his horrifying visage and from the forcefulness of his unwelcome manner. Still, she cared for him, strongly, in her way, and cried out, "Go not to your death. Please, stay with me, as a faithful hound might its master." He knew she would not be his, however, and he sprinted off to join the fray. He needed not go far, however, as the battle had neared the temple. The princess turned to find her demon by her side, crawling up the temple upon the thick legs of an insect, and they embraced as the great dragon in the sky neared. He whispered his love to her then, before his legs turned to feathered wings, and he arched into the sky, himself a writhing serpent now as well. Where their fangs met each other, blood like fire rained upon the city. But the demon acolyte could see into her heart, and he saw her deceptions before she could act upon them. And as the princess watched, the dragon god's head bled and fell from the sky, severed from the rest of its spasming form. The body crashed into the earth with a deafening noise, a blow that felt as though it could kill the earth itself. And from the dragon god's mighty flesh, the souls that she had consumed sprang forth in the foul forms of dragons, with poison for blood. But they fled from the demon acolyte, for he had slain their mother, and whose true form burned bright and flashed like lightning. The beastmen satiated themselves on the shadowy flesh of the spirits of the dead, until there were none left, and peace returned to the first city. But the heretics noted the hunger in the eyes of the beast lord, and the hope that he might still kill the demons and take the princess for himself. In the land where the sun did not shine, under a sky devoid of stars, where the sun indeed had perished amid a burning light. The princess and the demon were married that autumn, as the barley was planted. It was a season of new beginnings. The heretical sect celebrated their union, as did many of the priesthood, who were still unaware of the demons in their midst. Her father, the king himself, appeared to give his blessing, and she laughed to think of the days in which that would have pleased her. But without him, she would have never been at the temple, and none of this would have occurred. She thought his presence welcome for this. After many months within the densely shared quarters of the acolytes, sharing a bed with but one man was a welcome change. And there were other benefits besides.
Sexy, sexy. Yeah, no, that's the actual implication. Oh shit, like sexy, sexy sex. This feels so explicit after the entire earlier story you've been telling. Now they're just fucking. Sexy sex, at least they're married.
The demon, her husband, ascended to the priesthood first. He took his false vows of piety within that abandoned shrine. The princess next took her vows, amused throughout, and the high priest smiled back knowingly. Now a priestess, she prepared for her journey to the underworld, but for one complication. She discovered herself to be with child. The offspring of man and god, woman and demon, a child of both life and death. She spent days racked with pain, until the high priest revealed all to her. The child lived, yet it hungered as the dead do. It was a child of the dust, and from within the womb it consumed her, as the gods did the living. The demons set about ceremonies to ease her pain and suffering, and in doing so were unaware as the beastmen marched upon the city in their absence, hoping to conquer it, and to kill the demons who befouled its streets. Only the Beast Lord came to the temple, for he sought the princess, and he found her there, dying, and he discovered that death was a hunter that he could not kill. The demon acolyte, now a demon priest, feared this journey into the dark came too soon, and he whispered the secrets of the dead to her as she lay heaving on the temple floor, praying to uncaring gods for her safe return. They offered a sacrifice upon the altar, that she might follow the scent to guide her return. And then the child of dust entered the world, and the princess departed it. She found herself in the abyss, a wide ocean of darkness without end, without sun, without stars, and a hunger such as she had never known began to eat at her. As she groped at the dry dust and grey sand of that nothing land, eating it and feeling no respite from the unceasing ache within her. Around her, shades crawled low on their bellies in desperation, seeking an end to their suffering and finding it not. But she thought then of the smell of that meat in the temple, and she remembered herself. She journeyed far within that dark land, and passed the 7 gates of the underworld through ways and means taught to her by the heretical sect, and not for our knowing. Where the path had shifted, and where their knowledge failed, she relied on her own cleverness and determination, which she had never been short of. After she had lived lifetimes in the dark, she emerged to the temple just as she had left it, the meat still fresh upon the altar, for it had been but moments for the living. She emerged a mother, and a god born of sacrifice, as all true gods must be. The heretics brought her the child she'd borne, a daughter, and mother and child both suckled at the altar, drinking the nourishment of meat and blood. But a shadow fell across them, and they knew the god kings had sensed the child of dust among them. The demon priest felt their fear then, and knew that they would extinguish this child, which had both the hunger of the living and the dead, one who could not die, and whose thirst could not be slaked, who would surely capture the god kings themselves within clay, and feast upon it until there were none left. They directed their gaze toward the city, and it was as though night had fallen, though it was yet day. The Beast Lord turned to kill the child, to spare the city and his people from this doom. But yet, a peace was brokered, and a greater promise still. The demon priest and the princess offered their child to him, as a bride to the Lord of the Beastmen. She was as a dead man was, a shade, a living shadow. She grew even now, larger still, nearly fully grown, for a body and the necessity of a childhood meant nothing to one such as her.
No, that's gross. Gross. What the fuck? That's gross. You know, it's gross. He's not gonna... No, it's morally gross. Ugh. Yeah. Oh, this shouldn't have been written. No.
Physical form meant nothing to it, and it would not concern itself with the Beast Lord's grisly countenance. And yet, all could see that the child of dust had her mother's beauty, and would one day perhaps eclipse even her.
Ugh.
The Beast Lord, too, could see, and he agreed quickly to their promise, and howling, brought his beasts to their cause. The god kings came. Great serpents they were. They made the dragon god look as if it had been a simple snake upon the river bank. They seemed to be without end. They seemed to circle the world itself, as a snake will wrap itself around its prey. They swam through the air, descending upon the city, seeking out the child of dust. Beastmen leapt upon them, and the god kings struck back. The very sky itself seemed to tear asunder, and the princess felt that the world of the dead she had escaped had begun to descend upon the living. But within that temple there was an altar, and altars were made to appease the gods. The high priest had been busy since the princess had fallen ill, and he had slipped to far-off lands as the wind flows, and carried back with him a visitor, hidden in ages past. With flesh that flowed like smoke, and eyes of pale flame, an elder child of dust strode into the temple. Upon the altar that had been abandoned by the gods, he observed the rites. As the deafening sounds of battle and bloodshed rang throughout the city, he prayed. He brought blade to neck and poured forth the devoted blood from an animal. The elder child of dust sat, pious, as the empty eyes of god kings loomed outside the temple, waiting for the sign of betrayal that they expected. But none came. They then sank their fangs into him, expecting retribution, but he gave none. He gave only thanks to their beneficence once they had retreated from him. They then unleashed floodwaters upon the city. The rivers overflowed, and the blood and corpses in the city sailed along with it. It rose further, and the walls of the city, its homes and market, began to crumble. He praised only their generosity with ending the city's long thirst, even with wet river clay drifting by that he might use to bend them to his will. The god-kings were thus satisfied. If a child of dust could bring worship, and knew its place below the gods, then surely they had nothing to fear from yet another. They laughed at their folly, and their fear of one who in the end was revealed to be so weak, so subservient. They left then, a ruined city gasping in their wake. The new harvest, freshly planted, surely dead. The temple stood alone amid fallen homes. Even the palace itself laid low and humble on the ground. The heretical sect returned then, as did the princess and her child, as well as the beast lord and his men. And the elder child of dust spoke to them in the temple then, as light began to return to the land. I have been alone a long time, hunted by gods who fear me. I know each of you has felt the same. I look at you now, and see what my life could have been, had my kin not been lost to the gods' hunger. He turned to the princess now as he spoke. I wish you and your child well. May she grow strong, determined, and clever. For although the gods are powerful, they must one day be destroyed for their transgressions and greed, so that man may one day know peace. I am a child of dust, but I am just one old man. At this he smiled. But you, I believe you will be the ones to do it, to drive the god-kings from this land, to hunt them down wherever they may hide, in foreign jungles and far-off lands, until there are none left.
The moral of the story is, if you have a problem, you should kill God about it.
The princess smiled back at this. She turned to her demon husband then, and he saw within her heart the love she had for him, and the memories of him that she held dear. He saw, too, the hunger within her, to strike the gods from the sky and make them fear her as men had feared gods. It was time, she knew, to finally fulfill her curse, her prophecy, her destiny. And they had plenty of time, she knew, to work on it. Forever and forever and forever. But soon, she hoped it would be soon, that the sun would set on the time of gods, that the wretched things would die, and that though they did not know it yet, this was, indeed, their twilight.
Oh.
That was, sort of, the story. Well, we done did it. Join the Discord, by which I mean join the general chaos of the universe. Join the fractured breakdown of social order and the nearing of the coming anarchy. Join the deep discord strumming deep within your souls, the sharp disquiet that you never stop feeling, screaming deep within you, calling you toward the violence at the inevitable end of all things, for the old things are waking up, and they bring with them only despair. Also, don't forget to check the Goodreads account. Oh, and the Instagram. And there's a Patreon now, too. Goodbye. For now.
And also a huge, wonderful, beautiful shout out to
Keith.
To you. I guess to me.
Yeah.
Well, that was so weird. Who am I shouting out? Nobody else works on this podcast.
Shout yourself.
Shout out to me and to you, Max.
And to me.
You know what? To us.
To us.
All right, guys. We hope you have an amazing week, and we will see you soon. Bye.